Look at your hand right now. Look at the color of your skin. Whether it's deep brown, warm tan, pale ivory, or anything in between, that color has a story. Not just your personal story, not just your family's story, but a story that stretches back hundreds of thousands of years across continents through ice ages, famines, migrations, and genetic revolutions. The color of your skin is not an accident. It is not random. It is not decoration. It is the physical record of every single environment your ancestors ever had to survive in. And today, we're going to decode that record. From the very first dark-skinned humans who walked the African savanna, all the way to the pale-skinned people who eventually emerged in the cold, gray north of Europe and beyond. This is one of the most fascinating stories in all of human biology, and almost nobody knows the full picture. Most people have heard fragments, something about vitamin D, something about sunlight, maybe something about melanin. But the complete story is so much richer, so much more dramatic, and honestly, so much more surprising than the simple version most people have been told. So let's start from the beginning. The absolute beginning. 300,000 years ago, give or take a few tens of thousands of years, Homo sapiens appeared on the African continent. These were the first anatomically modern humans, our direct ancestors, the people whose DNA flows through every single one of us alive today. And here's the first critical fact you need to understand about them. Every single one of them was dark-skinned. Not some of them. Not most of them. All of them. Light skin, in the form we think of it today, simply did not exist yet. It hadn't been invented by evolution. There was no genetic variation producing pale complexions, no population of light-skinned humans hiding somewhere. The entire human species, 100% of it, was dark-skinned. This raises the most obvious question in the world. If every human being started out dark-skinned, why did some populations end up light? What happened? What changed? And why didn't everyone change the same way? To answer that, we need to first understand what skin actually is, because most people severely underestimate it. Skin is not packaging. That sounds like a strange thing to say, but it's genuinely how most people unconsciously think about it, as a wrapping, a container, something to hold your insides in. In reality, skin is the largest organ in your entire body. It is a living, breathing, metabolically active system with dozens of functions. It regulates your temperature. It produces hormones. It communicates with your immune system. It acts as a barrier against pathogens, environmental toxins, and physical damage. And critically for our story today, it is your body's primary interface with one of the most powerful and dangerous forces in nature, ultraviolet radiation from the sun. UV radiation is not something to be taken lightly. Every time sunlight hits your skin, UV rays are penetrating the outer layers and interacting directly with your DNA. And UV radiation damages DNA, not metaphorically, literally. It causes breaks in the DNA strand. It creates abnormal bonds between adjacent molecules, and if left unchecked, it causes mutations. Those mutations accumulate over a lifetime, and they can lead to melanoma, one of the most aggressive and deadly forms of cancer known to medicine. So from the very beginning, every organism that ever lived in sunlight has had to solve a problem. How do you protect yourself from the sun's energy while still being able to use it? The human body's answer to that problem is melanin. Melanin is the pigment responsible for skin color. It's produced by specialized cells called melanocytes, and it comes in a few different varieties, but the key one for our story is eumelanin, the dark brown to black pigment that absorbs UV radiation before it can penetrate deep enough to damage the DNA in your skin cells. Think of melanin as a biological parasol. The more of it you have, the darker your skin, and the better protected your DNA is from UV damage. The less melanin you have, the lighter your skin, and the more UV radiation passes through to deeper layers. Now you understand why every early human in Africa was dark-skinned. Africa, particularly the regions near the equator where Homo sapiens first emerged, receives some of the most intense ultraviolet radiation on Earth. The sun near the equator is nearly directly overhead year-round, which means UV rays travel the shortest possible distance through the atmosphere and hit the ground with maximum intensity. in that environment, having lots of melanin, having dark skin was not optional. It was survival. Individuals with less melanin suffered more DNA damage, higher rates of mutation, higher cancer risk. They were less likely to survive long enough to pass on their genes. So over hundreds of thousands of years, natural selection in Africa was absolutely ruthless in maintaining dark skin. It was a non-negotiable feature of being human in that environment. But melanin did something else in Africa that is equally important. And this is the part that surprises most people when they hear it for the first time. Dark skin in Africa wasn't just about protecting against skin cancer. It was protecting something far more immediately critical to survival, a vitamin called folate. Folate, also known as vitamin B9, is one of the most essential nutrients in the human body. It plays a critical role in DNA synthesis and repair, which means every cell in your body needs it just to divide and replicate properly. But where folate becomes absolutely decisive for evolution is in reproduction. Folate is essential for the healthy development of the neural tube in a developing fetus, the structure that eventually becomes the brain and spinal cord. Without adequate folate, neural tube defects occur, spina bifida, anencephaly, conditions that are devastating and often fatal. Beyond that, folate deficiency during pregnancy dramatically increases the risk of miscarriage and other serious complications. Here is the critical connection. Ultraviolet radiation destroys folate in the body. When UV rays penetrate the skin, they don't just damage DNA, they also break down folate molecules circulating just beneath the skin surface. In the intense UV environment of equatorial Africa, a woman with light skin would have her folate stores rapidly depleted by sun exposure. A woman with light skin in prehistoric Africa was therefore at serious risk of losing pregnancies, having children with severe birth defects, and experiencing other reproductive complications. In evolutionary terms, she would have fewer surviving children than a dark-skinned woman who retained her folate. Dark skin was literally protecting the next generation. It was protecting the viability of human reproduction itself. So in Africa, for hundreds of thousands of years, dark skin was being maintained by two powerful evolutionary forces simultaneously. Protection against UV-induced DNA damage and cancer on one side, and protection of folate for healthy reproduction on the other. Both of these forces were pushing hard in the same direction: keep the skin dark. This is why, by the time Homo sapiens had been around for a couple of 100,000 years, dark skin was essentially universal and deeply locked in place genetically. Then, somewhere between 70,000 and 100,000 years ago, something happened that would eventually change everything. Humans left Africa. We don't know exactly why. Maybe it was climate shifts. Maybe it was population pressure. Maybe it was simply curiosity and the restless human drive to explore. But small bands of modern humans began moving out of Africa, crossing into the Middle East, and from there spreading in all directions. Some moved into Central Asia. Some went east toward what is now India, Southeast Asia, China. Some eventually crossed into Europe. Some, tens of thousands of years later, crossed a land bridge into the Americas. Over tens of thousands of years, human populations spread across almost the entire planet. And as they spread, they moved into environments that were fundamentally different from the African savanna in one crucial way. The sun was weaker. In northern latitudes, in what is now Europe, northern Asia, Canada, the sun sits lower in the sky. UV rays have to travel a much longer distance through the atmosphere, and much of the UV radiation gets filtered out before it reaches the ground. Winters are long. Cloudy days are frequent. The total annual dose of UV radiation in, say, northern Scandinavia is a tiny fraction of what humans were exposed to near the equator in Africa. And this changed everything. Remember the two reasons dark skin was so valuable in Africa: cancer protection and folate protection. In northern latitudes, with the sun so much weaker, both of those pressures were dramatically reduced. UV levels were low enough that even light-skinned people wouldn't be getting devastating DNA damage. And UV levels were low enough that folate was no longer being rapidly depleted. The evolutionary justification for maintaining dark skin was evaporating. But nature abhors a vacuum, and into that vacuum rushed a new and equally urgent problem: vitamin D deficiency. Vitamin D is not really a vitamin in the traditional sense. Your body actually synthesizes it like a hormone. And the primary way your body produces it is through a reaction triggered when UVB radiation from sunlight hits the skin. UVB converts a cholesterol compound in your skin into a precursor molecule that your liver and kidneys then convert into active vitamin D. This is not a minor, optional process. Vitamin D is absolutely essential for calcium absorption, which means it's essential for building and maintaining strong bones. It's critical for immune function. It's important for muscle function. It plays roles in reproductive health and cardiovascular health. Without adequate vitamin D, the consequences are severe. In children, severe vitamin D deficiency causes rickets, a disease where bones don't calcify properly, resulting in soft, weak bones that bow and bend under the body's weight. Children with rickets develop bowed legs, a curved spine, a deformed chest, and stunted growth. Their bones fracture easily. They're chronically weak and ill. In the brutal reality of prehistoric life, a child with rickets had dramatically reduced chances of surviving to adulthood. In adults, severe vitamin D deficiency causes a condition called osteomalacia, soft, painful bones throughout the body. And in women specifically, vitamin D deficiency causes deformities of the pelvic bone. The pelvis narrows. The birth canal becomes misshapen. In a world without modern medicine, a woman with a deformed pelvis faced an agonizing death during childbirth, or the death of her child, or both. The evolutionary implications of this are enormous. So now consider the situation facing early humans who had migrated into northern regions and retained their dark African skin. Dark skin was blocking the weak northern sun so efficiently that their bodies couldn't produce enough vitamin D. They were vitamin D deficient. Their children were developing rickets. Their women were dying in childbirth. They were sick, weak, and reproducing poorly. The very same melanin that had been a life-saving shield in Africa was now, in the dim north, becoming a liability. And here is where evolution does what evolution does. Among any large population of humans, there are always random genetic mutations. Most mutations are neutral or harmful and disappear. But occasionally, a mutation arises that happens to be beneficial in the current environment. In the northern populations of early humans, some individuals were born with random mutations that caused their bodies to produce slightly less melanin. Their skin was very slightly lighter than average. And because their skin lent a bit more UVB radiation, their bodies produced a bit more vitamin D. They were a bit healthier. Their bones were a bit stronger. Their children survived at slightly higher rates. Their women survived childbirth at slightly higher rates. That slight edge was enough. Generation after generation, individuals with slightly lighter skin had marginally more surviving children than their darker skin counterparts. Over time, over many generations, the frequency of those light skin mutations in the population increased. The average skin color of the population gradually shifted. Darker to slightly lighter to lighter, lighter to even lighter. This is natural selection in action, visible in the human genome. Now here is where the story takes one of its most surprising twists, and it's a twist that we only discovered in the last couple of decades thanks to ancient DNA technology. For a very long time, scientists assumed that this lightening process must have happened gradually and steadily over the tens of thousands of years after humans first entered Europe. The reasoning seemed logical. Humans have been in Europe for 40,000 or more years, so they must have been getting progressively lighter the whole time. That was the standard model. Then scientists extracted and sequenced DNA from ancient human remains. And one of the most famous ancient DNA analyses came from a Mesolithic skeleton found in Cheddar Gorge in England. This man, who became known as Cheddar Man, lived approximately 10,000 years ago, well after humans had been present in Britain for thousands of years. Scientists expected to find genetic signatures consistent with pale, light-eyed Northern Europeans. What they found instead was remarkable. Cheddar Man had the genetic markers associated with dark to medium dark skin. He had dark, curly hair, but he also had blue eyes, a combination that genuinely surprised scientists and fascinated the public. Many early Europeans, it turned out, were still quite dark-skinned far later than anyone had assumed. So what finally triggered the dramatic, rapid lightening of European skin? The answer is one of the most important events in all of human history: the Neolithic Revolution, the invention of agriculture. Starting roughly 8,000 to 10,000 years ago, humans in the Middle East began deliberately cultivating crops and domesticating animals. This farming lifestyle gradually spread across Europe, bringing with it populations of farmers who mixed with the existing hunter-gatherers. But the critical thing about farming for our story is not the farming itself. It's what farming did to the diet. Hunter-gatherers ate a diet that was extraordinarily rich in vitamin D. They consumed fish, shellfish, organ meats, animal fat, all foods that are among the most concentrated natural sources of dietary vitamin D available. A hunter-gatherer living near a coast, regularly eating fatty fish and shellfish, would have had dietary vitamin D intake that substantially supplemented whatever their skin could produce. This dietary vitamin D was serving as a buffer, helping to compensate for the relatively low vitamin D production of darker skin in northern climates. Farmers ate grain: wheat, barley, oats, rye. These are excellent sources of carbohydrates and calories, but they contain essentially no vitamin D. When populations switched from a diverse hunter-gatherer diet to a grain-based farming diet, their dietary intake of vitamin D essentially collapsed to near zero. Suddenly, they were entirely dependent on their skin's ability to produce vitamin D from sunlight. And in the cloudy, low UV north, dark skin simply couldn't do the job anymore. This created an enormous new evolutionary pressure. Now, even a small amount of extra vitamin D production from slightly lighter skin was the difference between health and deficiency, between surviving children and sick ones, between a woman surviving childbirth and dying from it. The pressure for lighter skin became intense and urgent. And because farming populations were living in large, dense communities, much larger than hunter-gatherer bands, beneficial genetic mutations could spread through the population much faster. More people meant more opportunities for beneficial mutations to arise, and dense social networks meant those mutations could spread rapidly as people had children together across communities. The result was that skin lightening in European populations happened relatively quickly in evolutionary terms, concentrated largely over the last several thousand years rather than spread evenly over tens of thousands. This is why Cheddar Man could still have dark skin 10,000 years ago. The main pressure hadn't fully hit yet. The farming revolution was still in the future for Britain at that time, and the full collapse of dietary vitamin D hadn't occurred. The genetics underlying all of this are worth briefly understanding, because they reveal something important about the nature of skin color itself. There is no single skin color gene. This is one of the most persistently misunderstood aspects of human biology. Skin color is what geneticists call polygenic. It is controlled by dozens of different genes, all contributing small effects that add up to the overall result. These genes affect how much melanin is produced, how it is distributed in the skin, how the skin responds to UV exposure, and many other variables. The cumulative effect of all these genes working together produces the continuous spectrum of skin tones we see in humans around the world, from the deepest brown to the palest ivory and everything in between. One of the most fascinating discoveries in this field is what geneticists call convergent evolution. When scientists compare the specific genetic changes that led to light skin in Europeans versus the genetic changes that led to light skin in East Asians, they discovered something extraordinary. These two populations evolved lighter skin through largely different sets of genetic mutations. East Asians and Europeans both arrived at paler skin, but they took different genetic roads to get there. This is convergent evolution, when natural selection finds the same solution to the same problem through entirely different means. It tells us that the pressure to lighten skin in low UV environments was so strong and so universal that evolution basically found its way to the same answer twice, independently, using whatever genetic raw material was available in each population. There's one more piece of this puzzle worth discussing, because it goes slightly beyond skin color, but is intimately connected to the same story: a color. Every single blue-eyed person alive on Earth today descends from one individual, one ancestor who lived approximately 6,000 to 10,000 years ago and carried a specific mutation that reduced the production of melanin in the iris. Before that mutation, every human being on the planet had brown eyes. Brown eyes are the default, the ancestral state. The mutation that produces blue eyes essentially switched off the gene that deposits melanin in the front layer of the iris, resulting in eyes that appear blue because of the way light scatters through the nearly melanin-free tissue. This mutation arose in the same general time frame and the same geographic region as many of the skin lightening changes we've been discussing, which is not a coincidence. The same relaxation of UV pressure in northern latitudes that made darker skin less essential seems to have allowed other melanin reduction mutations, including in the eyes, to persist and spread through populations where they might previously have been selected against or simply been neutral. Today, blue eyes are found most commonly in northern and eastern Europe, with decreasing frequency as you move south and east toward the equator, a distribution that perfectly mirrors the UV latitude gradient we've been talking about all along. Stepping back and looking at the full picture, what emerges is something that is genuinely beautiful in its biological elegance. Human skin color is not a fixed racial characteristic. It is not a sign of superiority or inferiority. It is not a hierarchy. It is a calibration system, a finely tuned biological instrument that different populations, in different environments at different times in history, have adjusted to different settings based on exactly one variable: how much ultraviolet radiation they needed to balance cancer protection and folate protection on one side against vitamin D production on the other. Light skin performs better at vitamin D synthesis in low UV environments. Dark skin performs better at UV protection and folate preservation in high UV environments. Neither is superior. Both are solutions to the same equation, optimized for different inputs. The great irony at the heart of this entire story is this: the very same star, the same sun, produced both dark skin and light skin. In the blazing equatorial regions where it beats down most intensely, it forced the evolution of dark, protective skin packed with melanin. In the dim northern regions where its power is diminished, its very weakness forced the evolution of lighter skin that could capture what little UV there was. The sun didn't choose sides. It didn't favor one group over another. It simply applied different pressures in different places, and evolution, with its usual blind efficiency, responded accordingly. Today, of course, we live in a world where many of the original evolutionary pressures have been modified or removed. We were sunscreen that blocks the UV radiation that would otherwise damage our DNA and destroy our folate. We take vitamin D supplements and eat foods fortified with it. We live in heated homes that protect us from cold climates. We have artificial lighting that extends our days beyond what any prehistoric human could have imagined. Technology has weakened many of the environmental pressures that shaped human skin color over the preceding hundreds of thousands of years. Our skin tones are now somewhat out of sync with our environments. People with dark skin living in northern latitudes need to be mindful of vitamin D levels, and people with very light skin living near the equator need to be serious about UV protection. But none of that changes what our skin color fundamentally is. Every human alive today, regardless of where they fall on the color spectrum, shares the same African ancestors from 300,000 years ago. Ancestors who were all dark-skinned, all facing the same equatorial sun, all carrying the same melanin that evolution had built up over millennia of survival pressure. Every shade of human skin that exists today is a branch growing from that same trunk. Some branches grew in directions that reduced melanin in response to northern environments and dietary changes. Others maintained or increased melanin in response to intense equatorial sun, but they all come from the same place. Skin color is not a hierarchy. It never was. It is an evolutionary record, written in melanin, encoded in DNA, shaped over hundreds of thousands of years by nothing more dramatic or ideological than the angle of the sun and the food on the plate. When you look at your skin, you're looking at the cumulative answer to a question your ancestors were asked over and over again across the millennia. How much sunlight do you need to survive? The color you see is the answer they arrived at, and it is, in the most literal biological